So, today we're going to crack open a case file on a really fascinating linguistic detective story. It's all about some of the most influential and, yeah, most debated letters in the New Testament. We're going to follow the clues hidden in the language itself to try and solve a literary mystery that's centuries old. Let's get into it.
Right, so here it is, the big question that's had scholars scratching their heads for generations. We have 13 letters in the New Testament that all say they're from Paul. But when you look really closely at the language, it starts to look like some of them might have been written by someone else. And this is way more than a simple yes or no question. It really opens up this whole world of historical and textual investigation.
Okay, so at the absolute heart of our investigation are these three letters, what we call the pastoral epistles. They're not written to whole churches, but to two of Paul's colleagues, Timothy and Titus. And, right away, scholars noticed something was off. The tone, the focus on administration, the whole style. It just feels so different from letters like Romans or Galatians. So to figure out why, we've got to look at the evidence, starting with the actual words on the page.
Our first clue comes from the vocabulary. Seriously, think of it like a linguistic fingerprint left at the scene of the crime. When you start analyzing the words used in these pastoral letters and then you compare them to Paul's other, undisputed letters, a really clear pattern just jumps right out at you.
Get this, a full 36% of the words in the pastoral epistles don't show up anywhere in the 7 letters we are absolutely sure Paul wrote. 36%. That is a huge chunk of vocabulary. This isn't just some minor little variation, it's a massive difference that really needs an explanation. And here's where it gets fascinating. This unique vocabulary, it's not random at all. These words start popping up all over the place in other Christian writings from the early 2nd century. Take the word eusebia, which means godliness. It's in the pastorals 10 times, but it's almost totally absent from Paul's core letters. The same thing happens with words for endurance and, this is a big one, specific titles for church leaders, like bishop and elder. All of these are super common in the letters of a church father named Ignatius of Antioch.
So what does this all mean? Well, this difference in vocabulary shows a massive shift in what the community was focused on. Paul's undisputed letters talk about leadership in these really charismatic terms, apostles, prophets. But the pastorals and Ignatius, they're using language for a structured, formal hierarchy. Paul talks about pistis as a personal trust in Christ, but the pastorals and Ignatius use that exact same word to mean the faith, like a set of correct teachings. They're speaking a shared language because they share the same concerns.
Okay, so they share a bunch of key words. Case closed, right? They must be connected. Well, hold on, not so fast. Our investigation is about to take a really unexpected turn when we zoom out from single words and look at the broader patterns of writing style. I mean, it's the logical next question, isn't it? Given how much vocabulary the pastorals and Ignatius share, you would totally expect their overall writing styles to line up pretty closely. But when we actually put that idea to the test, the results are, well, surprising. We can actually do this with a cool technique called stylometry. It's a way of analyzing things like sentence lengths, grammar, and word frequency to create a unique fingerprint of an author's style. It lets us mathematically measure how similar two texts are. And this is where our mystery gets a huge plot twist. And the results are kind of shocking. Even though the pastorals share all that unique vocabulary with Ignatius, the stylometric analysis shows that Ignatius's writing style is actually closer to Paul's authentic letters than the style of the pastorals is. The pastorals are the real odd ones out. So how on earth can they share a specific vocabulary but have such wildly different writing styles? Well, here's the breakdown. Paul's authentic letters, and Ignatius's letters too, they're known for this passionate, almost breathless rhetorical feel with these long, complex, flowing sentences. The pastorals, on the other hand, are much more formal and instructional, with shorter, tidier sentences. One of the biggest tells is the use of these little Greek words called particles that link ideas together. They are everywhere in Paul's writing, but in the pastorals, they've practically vanished. So all of this brings us to the big question, why? Why these specific words? Why these totally different styles? The answer, it seems, lies in the changing world of early Christianity. The language itself is a mirror, reflecting a faith that was in transition, facing a whole new set of problems that needed a new way of talking. Yeah, we saw this earlier with the word faith. For Paul, it's this deeply personal act of trust and reliance. But for the author of the pastorals and for Ignatius, who are writing maybe a generation or two later, the faith has become something you can hold, a set of teachings, a body of doctrine that has to be protected from mistakes.
It's a subtle shift in a single word, but it's absolutely profound.
See, by the early 2nd century, the church just had different priorities. It wasn't a small, charismatic movement anymore. It was becoming an institution that needed real structure. The focus totally shifted to building a clear hierarchy, defending sound doctrine, and warning against what they considered heresy. This is the world that's reflected in the language of both the pastorals and Ignatius.
So at the end of the day, that shared vocabulary and all those shared themes in the pastorals and Ignatius, they point to a very specific moment in history, a time when the church was getting more organized, more institutional, and maybe a little more defensive. It was just a different world, with different problems than the one Paul was writing for back in the middle of the 1st century.
Okay, so we've got all this evidence on the table now. The unique words, the stylistic weirdness, the historical context. We can finally ask the million-dollar question. If Paul didn't write the pastorals, then who did?
All right, the most common view among scholars is something called the pseudonymous authorship hypothesis. The theory goes that a really devoted but anonymous follower of Paul wrote these letters in his teacher's name, maybe in the late 1st or early 2nd century. The goal wasn't really to trick people, but to use Paul's authority to tackle the new problems the church was facing, like setting up leaders and fighting heresy.
But that's not where the story ends. The really strong connections we've been tracing, especially all those linguistic ties to one particular buy, have led some scholars to float a much more specific and honestly way more provocative theory about who the author might be. And here it is, the Ignatian authorship hypothesis. This idea suggests that all these clues, the shared vocabulary about godliness, endurance, and especially the whole church hierarchy thing, they all point a finger directly at Ignatius of Antioch, or maybe someone in his inner circle. Could the very person whose writings helped us identify the unique language of the pastorals actually be their author? And the motivation would have been huge. Ignatius was a massive champion for a strong church structure led by a single bishop. By writing in Paul's name, he could basically give his vision for the church the ultimate apostolic stamp of approval, a vision that was totally central to his own letters and ministry. It's a bold theory for sure, but it does a pretty good job of connecting all the linguistic dots we've uncovered. And that just leaves us with one last, really crucial question to think about. Whether they were written by Paul, or an anonymous follower, or even Ignatius himself, these letters have shaped Christian thought for 2,000 years. But how does our understanding of where a text comes from, who wrote it, affect how we read it today? What, if anything, does it change about its meaning or its authority? That's the real puzzle at the heart of this whole investigation.